I just ate a bunch of blueberries, so my lips are like purple. Somebody asked me about sound selection the other day, and I was like, just pick the sounds you want to hear. But then I felt that that was too vague of an answer. So in this video, I'm going to give you guys a formula you could use to pick the right sounds for your beat. Let's hop straight into it. So I studied from the pros. So let's give you some examples first, and I'll give you a tactic you could use right away. So let me show you the tactic before I even get to these pro beats. Okay, so firstly, if you hear a beat, drag it into FL. Grab a small section of the beat where you're unsure, okay, but you like the sound. So maybe 8 bars of a section. Now on the top left, if you go to extract stems from sample, new FL Studio 21.2 has this AI that can separate the sounds for you. The reason this is important is because now you can individually hear layers of the song. So you can stop hearing the song as the song and you start hearing it as pieces. And then you go, okay, here's this happening here. Here's this other thing happening in the melody. Oh, there's 4 things going on in the melody. I thought it was only 2. And then you can really get clarity. So this is the point of using this exercise. So what it spits out are 4 tracks: a vocal track, a bass track, a drum track, and an instruments track. So let's solo each track. So here's the drum. So if my goal was to figure out what kind of drums, you have to start asking about characteristics of sound. I'll get into this later when I get into the geeky part of the video. We will get scientific later down the line. Okay, so with these drums, let me ask myself, what do I hear? I hear doom, doom. I hear 2 velocities of a kick. It's not just boom, boom, it's not just this punchy kick every single time. And I hear a snare that goes ch, ch, ch. Very short decay snares. You can even visually see how short these snares are. So it's not like, so all these small characteristics will add up, and I'll have a formula for you. So the first thing is understanding what is happening in the actual song. So firstly, you have ghost kicks, they're called, which is like, and then it goes into the real kick. And then you have different variations of a snare, which is like a rim snare. So it's like boom, boom. If you don't know what a rim is, you know, if you don't know what a real snare drum is, it goes boom, boom, ka, boom, boom, ka, like that in real life. Now, when you turn your stick to the side and you hit the side of the snare, you're hitting another metal piece, but it goes, it's a shorter decay time. It's not as big as the snare head. So it's boom, boom. And that's where the rim comes from, that sound. Okay, so it's a different type of hitting the snare. I don't hear hi-hats in here. I hear like a little cymbal. So once you focus on all the drums, you're like, wow, there's a lot going on. There's different rhythms. There's 3 things happening. You probably wouldn't notice. Now let's focus on the bass. Just ask yourself, what type of bass is it? It's not a synth bass. It's not a yeet bass. It's not an 808. It's not, okay, it's an electric bass that is barely saturated. It just has enough saturation to where you can hear it. Okay, so now I know I need an electric bass. So once you simplify, you'll become a lot better at sound selection. Now, a lot of sound selection too is you simply hearing a sound. It's hard. You can't identify a Pokemon that you don't know. So if you think about sounds like Pokemon, if you don't know what a Togepi is, you don't even know what to call a sound. You're like, I heard that sound before, or even if you haven't heard it, you're like, I don't know what the name is. Okay, so that's why a lot of sound selection is hearing a sound, defining a sound in your brain. The way your brain works is like a big dictionary. So when you hear violin, your brain says input violin, output. That's what it's. You input the value for what the input is. So the key in this case would be the violin, and the value would be what the sound is to you. Okay, so here's another layer. So in the original sample, I didn't hear the guitar. Actually, now I hear it. But before, I didn't notice the guitar. I heard the piano. So when you're asking about sound selection, what's happening in this clip of the instruments? We have somebody slamming on the keys, so it has a lot of harmonic content. Okay, that's what brightens the sound up. And I have this like swelling guitar thing on the right with like a filter on it. And I have this guitar on the left side. Okay, so once you start really narrowing down on what's actually happening, you can now start to say, okay, I need a piano that I could play hard and it expresses that way. FL Keys is not going to be that piano. You need a piano from a Kontakt library or something that can express to that degree, or Keyscape that can give you those, the realistic sound of when you slam your hand on the piano, okay? Because it requires different samples. Okay, so that's how you start to learn sound selection is one, breaking apart songs, but two, simply having a definition for the sound. Now, I know that was, a little esoteric, but that's a practice that you need to get in the habit of doing is identifying sounds. I'm going to play some beats from other videos I did about Zaytoven, Neptunes, Timbaland, and other styles. So we're going to listen and just try to hear what's happening. I hear an organ. We're playing the blues scale. I hear a pan piano to the right. I hear the dilemma chant. The bass is the 808. And the snare is a very short snare. Okay, so it's the same formula: drums, bass, instruments, vocal. What are the drum, bass, the instruments, and the vocal of this track? The bass is the 808. The drums are the 808 technically, and the short snare drum. Okay, the instruments are the organ and the piano, pan to the right. And the vocals are the vocal chants. That. And then the dilemma chant. So that's all the 4 layers: bass, drums, instruments, vocals. So now let's break down this next song. This one's from a Timbaland style track we made. So the bass is really the kick drum because it has an extended body to the bass. Now the drum is a snare and a clap combined. So it's and it's a and a. Okay, then we have the hi-hat. So you start identifying the drums. You say bass is the bottom end of the kick, in this case the sub. Then you have your drums, your kick drum, your hi-hats, your snare, and your clap. And then you have the next layer, which is instruments. You hear like this flute sound. Really, it's a string sound. It sounds like a flute. And you get the in the background. That's a filter resonance movement. So now you can start to identify. But again, a lot of this requires you knowing what sounds sound like and what is a sound. You have to identify it first. And I'm going to give you guys the science behind it. We're going to move a little bit quicker, but as you see, every song has these 4 layers to it. So here's the Neptunes track we made. So no kick drum so far. I think there's a kick in here somewhere. There we go. Now here we have the kick drum, whereas before we just had the bass going. I didn't hear the kick at first. See, that's why you need to separate sounds so you could actually perceive them. So you heard the bass was the doom. Probably an electric bass. The drums are your grinding kick. You have that short snare. You don't have hi-hats, you have shakers on this track. Okay, now you start to break stuff into layers and you start to hear it that way. For the instruments, we have a Rhodes piano. We have that woo-woo synth lead. We have some strings, and then we have the Rhodes, the high-pitched keys. That are the keys. You have that guitar. So now you're starting to break stuff down into bass, drums, instruments, vocals. Everything starts to make more sense. Now, all the combinations of those 4 layers are different. Here's Afrobeat. Now, in that case, that sound that you hear is called a log drum. You don't need to memorize that. But the point is, it's just a different style bass. That's what separates the genre here. Now, for the drums, we have a kick, we have a shaker loop, and we have a short snare. And then there's no vocal, and I don't know if there's music on this one. Yeah. So the music is like a hand mallet type sound. And a little flute in the background. And there's a in the back. And some kind of keys. So once you start, again, mentally separating sound and truly zooming in to hear all the layers of sound, that's when you can get to the next level. I'm not going to bore you with all these examples because there's too many, but I had them loaded up just for this video. And the greater point is, if you struggle with sound selection, listen to the song you want to sound like and separate it into 4 sections: bass, drums, instruments, vocal. Once you get it down to that science, then you move into like the actual how to. Okay, so now let's move into more of the science. So this is a little esoteric. If you want more, just join us in premium, because that's where I have whole courses on explaining this stuff from the ground up. I even have a course on how to build your own drum kit using sound design. That's how deep into sound design I get. But everything starts with what's called a sine wave. It's called a pure cycle. So if I switch this to this, this is our purest tone. Now I'm going to pull up a graph here, because only until I saw this graph did I understand sound. Sound was always this esoteric thing to me because I couldn't visualize what harmonics were. So let me show you something that changed the way I perceive sound. And let me change it out. Okay, so this sine wave. Now this sine wave, it has harmonics to it because it's probably not. Let's do basic shapes. Okay, so now if we look at this sine wave, you see that it's basically a horizontal line straight across. Okay, it's just a horizontal line. Now, what separates a sine wave playing one note and a sawtooth playing the same exact note? So I'm going to put this graph over here. Hopefully you guys can see it over my head. I can't see myself. Let's switch the wavetable. So here's a sine wave. Let me lower it so y'all don't get. Okay, so it's just a horizontal line going straight across. Now let's switch the waveform to a sawtooth. It's a very big visual difference. Now look at all these horizontal lines. All these horizontal lines are called harmonics. So you have what's called a fundamental frequency, which is the lowest frequency a sound can have. It's fundamental frequency, or it's a natural frequency. And then we multiply that times different numbers to create what are called upper harmonics. So for example, if my lowest frequency sound in this case is 100 hertz, my second harmonic is 2 times 100. My third harmonic is 3 times 100. My fourth harmonic is 4 times 100, on and on and on until a million and a gazillion. Okay. So harmonics are just multiples of what's called your fundamental frequency. Now, each sound has a different stack of harmonics, and it's not always even harmonics. It's not always odd harmonics. It's not always harmonics perfectly in the multiples. So that's where you get into, I'll get into that in a second. But the point is, here's the sine wave, horizontal line. Here's a sawtooth, many harmonics. Here's a triangle wave, less harmonics, but more harmonics than a sine wave. Here's the pulse wave, or square wave, gives you odd harmonics. You don't need to memorize that. And then there's different pulse width modulation. They all give you different stacks of harmonics. That's what creates a sound. Now I'm going to move into a little more, again, esoteric sound design here, but let's add another oscillator and let's modulate oscillator A by oscillator B. So now we're doing what's called frequency modulation. So as I modulate, like the big brother shaking the little brother, if the big brother shakes the little brother faster and faster and faster, you know, he's going to be shaking as he's talking or whatever. So let's turn up the warp. Now look at the graph. You're going to see more and more harmonics. I'm going to turn this down so I don't blow your ears off. And that's what frequency modulation does. It adds harmonics to a sound, or it modulates a sound depending on the frequency. Okay, so I took this basic horizontal sine wave, I'm modulating it by another sine wave, and now you get multiple harmonics. And that's how you get house sounds and house bass. You know, what you're doing is manipulating the harmonic content of an item. So that's what sound actually is. If you filter out a flute, you get the lowest frequency of a flute, it's a sine wave. If you filter out a bass guitar, you get the lowest frequency, it's a sine wave. If you filter out whatever it is, you're going to get a sine wave, because the ultimate fundamental frequency is a sine wave. Everything else are just multiples of itself. Okay, so now let's get into a little esoteric of a topic, which are called upper harmonics here. And we're going to use the harmonic series. So I'm going to try to make this advanced but simple at the same time. So here's where you will start to hear different intervals in music when you add different harmonics. So you're going to hear different notes. Now add the second harmonic. Now these are literally 2 different notes. Different note than the original. So as you see, different harmonics give you different notes. Okay, so when you stack them up, it's like building a chord within a sound. Okay, but this is how we can create that West Coast bass. then you would have a filter cut off and then, give an envelope to this. I didn't come here to sound design. And that's why it sounds so full. It's because you're playing multiple notes. You have a lot of harmonic content. So that's what sound actually is. It's filtered out noise, or it's a stacking of frequency. And, when you think about sound that way, it's so much more simple. Now, if you struggle with sound, start with stringed instruments. A piano is actually a stringed instrument. So if we load up Keyscape, for example, and you look up under the hood of a piano, it's actually hammers that go hit strings, different lengths of different strings. That's what creates the note in the harmonic structure of a piano. So if you look in the lid here, you can kind of see it. The horizontal stuff, that's a long string. When you hit a piano key, the hammer hits upward and it strikes a string, and that string vibrates. That's what a piano actually is. It's a stringed instrument. A harp, think about a harp as like a vertical piano. Okay, so that's basically an uncovered vertical piano, tilted up. A guitar is strings, stringed instruments that you bow. The only difference is you're bowing the string instead of using your fingers or hammers to hit the string. So different stringed instruments appear in different forms, but whenever you struggle with melody, remember that sound was invented through string. So once you get back to the string concept, you have an easier time identifying intervals and good ideas. And the cool part about stringed instruments is that you can always translate these to other instruments. Now, I don't want to bore you guys to tears, but studying these masterful music producers like Just Blaze, where's my Just Blaze beat? Let me find it real quick. Just Blaze, where art thou? If I can't find it, I just had it 2 seconds ago. Oh, you know what? I didn't drag it in. That's probably why. All right, so here's the Just Blaze track that we did, and then we'll look at the commonalities between this and the Timbaland track. So listen closely. Okay, so if you listen, you hear okay in the background. I forgot to load up the Scott Storch beat. But the Scott Storch beat uses orchestral strings. It uses a flute, a woodwind instrument. Most of the instruments that these pros use are instruments that can express to high levels. The difference between, not even Flex, but like an FL Studio patch is that the Serum plugin can only express but so much. You have to really program it deeply to have true expression like a real instrument. If you pick up a guitar, it goes dong, or it can go dong, or it can go bang, or it can go bang. There's 1,000 things you can do with the guitar that give it an expression and a unique articulation. With synths that just do this, not much you could do except volume automation, pitch automation, effects automation. It's not as expressive as a woodwind, for example, like a saxophone, where you're literally breathing into the instrument, and human breath is so unique to where you're going to get a different style every single time. And you get vibrato, and you get the natural wind from a human's lungs. So it's a very unique approach to sound. So let's listen to this Timbaland. The main instrument is a string. That thing is a filter sweep, same as the Just Blaze. That's a filter sweep. So they're using things to catch the ear. The way the human ear is designed is to catch up on things that change over time. Whenever you have stagnancy in the ear, it starts to mute it out. Okay, so that's why they had these filter sweeps, to keep people's ear quite literally engaged. That's how the biology is set up. So you see that in Timbaland tracks, Just Blaze tracks. In the Scott Storch track, you saw orchestral strings. Dum, 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 boom, dun, dun, boom, dun, 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 boom, dun, 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 boom. Okay, it's strings. It's layered strings. Same with the Just Blaze track. I think we have another Neptunes track in here. Now, this one didn't use a resonance filter sweep. But what's the commonality? All stringed instruments. Piano, guitar, and arco strings from the trite. So writing in stringed instruments, that's a very common thing with these top records and top producers. Zaytoven beat, the writing on a stringed instrument called a piano. That bring, 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 bring. Okay, so in the J Dilla beat, I forget what we used on this one. Now this is a sample, but the piano in here. Then you have that brass in the background, which is a woodwind instrument that you blow your expression into. So as you see, all these beats are basically instruments where you can get to the highest level of expression and articulation. It's not always about the note. It's about how you express the note. Do you use crescendo? Do you use pizzicato, spiccato? Do you use tremolo? You know, there's different ways to express the same note. Piano, bass guitar. So just think like a band when you guys are picking sounds. I think we overcomplicate it because we think we have to create a new formula, but it comes down to bass, drums, instruments, vocals. Now, when you get into like, okay, you want to make a specific style like Metro Boomin or Just Blaze and all that, then you need to figure out what samples they used or which sample crates they dug from. Okay. Or if you're trying to build, you know, get the Teddy Riley drums, you're like, I love Teddy Riley's style, but how do I get those drums? That's 90% of the sound is the drums. So if you don't know that the drums come from the Roland S770 and you think they come from the Kawai kits, you know, then you're always going to be going down the wrong rabbit hole, because the last step to this is research. And yes, you're going to have to go on forums. You're going to have to go to smarter people online and just really look at all the answers, download them all, and just try to figure out what's the truth of it all. So if I wanted Teddy Riley stuff, I would go to this kit here, Roland S770. You know, for these New Jack Swing snares and stuff. Okay, so you know, that's how deep into sound selection you have to go. Is once you understand the 4 layers: bass, drums, instruments, vocals. Then you say, okay, I want those specific drums. How do I get those specific drums? I understand it's a short drum where the snare has a bunch of reverb on it. Chances are it's an older snare sample that comes with reverb already built into it. By the 80s, they love some reverb. So the reverb was built into the snare sample. So I go, okay, this is probably an older drum kit. Let me go back into the older drum kits. Let me search up Teddy Riley interviews, Teddy Riley making beats, until you figure out the actual gear he used or whoever used. Then you try to find the samples somewhere online. Okay. Or just sample stuff that they sampled. So that's, you know, that's the research side that nobody wants to do. But sound selection is really that simple and complex at the same time. Here's my last point, is that, you know, more aggressive sounds have higher harmonics. So I'll give you one last lesson before we wrap this video, which is when I send a sine wave through saturation, it's creating upper harmonic content. So edgier tones have lots of harmonic content. So if you're going for a softer vibe, you're not going to pick a song that has super harmonically rich stuff because it's going to sound too aggressive. So let's run this bass through Saturn 2, for example. And let's pull up Wave Candy so we can visualize all this. I have so many parts of the screen up. Okay. Now let's load up Saturn 2, FabFilter Saturn 2, and let's run this through different algorithms. So as you can see, we're creating harmonic content in the sound. Now, if you distort your bass and run it through a bunch of saturation, you're going to get a more edgy sound, a more gritty, aggressive tone, more restless type of tone. Whereas if you're going for something smoother or vibier, you would pick something with less harmonic content. Now switch out the algorithm. Let's do saturation. Now let's do extreme. Look at how many harmonics we're creating. So this is going to give you an edgier. Sounds like a Kanye track. So that gives you that type of tone because of the overtones and the clashing and wave interference that you get with it. So that's the lesson. There's a lot. So if you guys want to learn more, go to our premium section. Just go to busyworksbeats.com/premium. You get a free trial for your first 14 days and then regular billing. We have so many courses that it's too much to list right here. Subscribe if you're new. Like the video. Let's help more producers around the world. Peace.